Let's begin.
What the hell? Now it won't work at all? Oh, hey there, guys. Sorry, just trying to get this freaking Xbox to work. But of course, this one seems broken too. I hate it when this happens. But then again, I guess it's all a matter of perspective, because in the case of tonight's little story, some things are meant to be broken. So, if you're curious as to how it all comes to an end, settle yourselves by the light of a fire and prepare yourself for the first installment of a two-part horror extravaganza, Breaking the Curse on Locust Lake, Part 1.
Shiloh had been brought into the hospital after a horrific attack. First, the attacker was Dr. Sarah Clark, a psychologist that had brought the survivors of the Locust Lake killer back to the scene of the crime before reenacting her own sick fantasies of murder upon the survivors, finishing off what the supposed Locust Lake killer had started. There are already rumors that the woman may have been possessed by the woman in the water, an old Native American legend of a woman that cursed the lake after the murder of her daughter by two young men. Others say she may have had dissociative identity disorder, but no one can tell for sure, mainly because she still hasn't been found. Then, after the attack from the doctor, she was then attacked by not one, but two different masked men who resemble past accounts of the Locust Lake killer. A man had been put to death for these crimes, and yet a masked man that had been haunting the woods for years now was in the basement morgue of the very hospital where Shiloh now sat, recovering. The hospital was swarming with doctors, nurses, and police officers, and outside, down in the parking lot, were a large group of journalists, reporters, and TV cameras, all from different news publications and TV news stations, all of them looking for the next big scoop, all of them wanting any bit of news of the new massacre at Locust Lake and its survivors. Shiloh sat inside room 237 in the hospital, where she would occasionally look out of the window or watch TV, but everywhere she looked, she was reminded of the horror she had gone through. Whether it be the reporters in the parking lot or the police in the hallway. Even the TV was playing news of the Locust Lake massacre on nearly every station. Shiloh was big news, but she didn't feel like it. She just wanted to move on with her life. "Hey, Shiloh," Ben said as he came limping in through the door. He was pretty beat up and had a few stitches here and there, but Shiloh was happy to see he was doing all right. Michael came in shortly after Ben, a metal crutch under each arm and a cast on his leg that was causing him to have issues with his balance on the crutches.
"Hey,"
Shiloh said, happy to see her friends were safe.
"How you doing?"
Michael asked.
My stomach hurts and I feel kind of dopey from the meds, but I'm alive, so that's a plus,"
Shiloh said, giving Michael and Ben a thumbs up. "Yeah, I bet. After pulling a stunt like you did, you're pretty lucky," Ben said to her.
"Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Sorry about that,"
Shiloh said.
"But you gotta admit, for how stupid it was, I was pretty badass,"
Shiloh said, with a little laugh before gripping her stomach in a little discomfort.
"Yeah, you were a total badass,"
Michael said. Ben sighed. "Yeah, you were pretty awesome. Crazy, but awesome. It was then that a nurse could be heard talking to a patient outside of Shiloh's room.
Sir, you are going to have to get back into bed. You need your rest.
A 30-something-year-old female nurse said.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I just lived through hell, and I need to get up and walk around.
A somewhat familiar, gruff voice came from the outside of the room. Then, Shiloh saw a familiar face. A chubby man came slowly walking around the corner. He was balding and had a bandage over his throat. It was Raybob, with Nurse Landis right behind him, trying to get him back into his bed.
Raybob?
Shiloh exclaimed happily.
Huh? Shiloh, how'd you get away from that crazy doctor? Are you all right?
Raybob said, swarming her with questions as he entered the room.
They took her. The two monsters of Locust Lake took her. It was Casper and another guy, and then this guy found me.
Shiloh said, introducing Raybob to Ben.
Any friend of Shiloh's is a friend of mine,
Raybob said, shaking Ben's hand.
But then we had a run-in with them too, and, well, I fought Casper. I fought him, and I won, and, well, I overheard one of the officers outside my room talking to Nurse Landis and the other guy that attacked us here. He's down in the morgue, but I don't think he's dead.
Shiloh told them. It's all right. They're both dead. It's over. Ben spoke up.
You saw what they looked like.
Shiloh began.
They were both walking, rotting corpses. There was nothing normal about this situation. You think that a little thing like a truck accident is going to kill this thing?
Shiloh finished.
I agree. I think she's right, dude.
Michael jumped in. So, how did you get here? Ben asked Raybob, changing the conversation.
Yeah, I saw Dr. Clark cut your throat.
Shiloh exclaimed.
I guess she didn't cut deep enough, and I thank the Lord she didn't. I got very, very lucky.
Raybob answered.
That's right, Raymond. You are very lucky, but you should get back to bed, or you're not going to feel so lucky when your medication wears off.
Nurse Landis spoke up from the doorway to the room.
All right. I'll go back to bed. No need to get all in a tizzy.
Raybob answered to Nurse Landis.
I'll see you three later, and it was very nice to meet y'all. You get better, young lady.
Raybob said to them, before turning around to follow Nurse Landis back to his bed, just a few rooms down. Meanwhile, down in the basement lay the body of Jacob Treagle. His large form laid out outstretched upon the medical examiner's table.
So,
said medical examiner Dr. Wesley.
They say that you're the one responsible for many of these bodies.
He continued.
Let's see what you look like under this mask.
Dr. Wesley then said, while reaching down with both hands to first cut the rope that held the mask onto Jacob's face and then grip either side of the wooden mask's edges to lift it up off his face. But after a few small tugs, the mask would not come off. Over time, it had fused with his skin, sealing the wood to his face with fungus and moss. Dr. Wesley then once again retrieved the scalpel he used to cut the mask's ropes, and then he slowly began to slice around the mask's edges, cutting through years of growth and decay. He circled the scalpel around every edge of the mask and, once again, gripped either edge, and with a few small pulls, was able to disconnect it from Jacob's face, peeling some of the skin along the way. After removing the rotting wooden mask, Dr. Wesley reeled back in disgust. Before him, he saw the face of the monster. A head was revealed, with patches of thin hair amongst years of growth and mold and grime. The man's face was melted and distorted. The skin had been burned away and fused together in places, including a wave of hanging flesh that had fused over most of one of his eyes. Yellowed, clouded over eyes. His nose was completely missing, leaving bits of dangling, melted flesh hanging over a hole where it once had been. His lips had retreated backward and had curved inward to reveal gray and rotting gums with yellowed and blackened teeth setting within them.
Damn. What the hell happened to you?
Dr. Wesley said to Jacob's corpse. Then, as Dr. Wesley was reaching down to cut away Jacob's clothing, he was suddenly stopped by a large hand. Jacob grabbed a hold of the doctor's arm and snapped it at the elbow, causing Dr. Wesley to scream in pain. But his cries of pain only lasted a few short moments before a scalpel was driven deep into the doctor's eye socket, bursting his eye with a pop of viscous liquid before being driven deeply into his brain. Nurse Ramey was also present in the morgue and came running around the corner in time to see Jacob drop Dr. Wesley's body onto the floor as it twitched and spasmed about, the scalpel still lodged deep within his eye socket. The nurse didn't even have time to react before she was grabbed around her throat and forced downward onto the examining table. Her feet dangled just inches over the floor, with her body bent over backwards onto the cold metal table. She attempted to scream, but the hand around her neck gripped her with such pressure that it prevented her from doing so. Jacob then reached onto the tray of medical tools and retrieved an electric bone saw, a small circular-shaped saw that was primarily used to cut through the sternum or the skull, and that is precisely what Jacob had in mind. He flipped the saw on and began to lower the spinning instrument towards Nurse Ramey's face. The rotting blade cut through the center of her head, just above the bridge of her nose and right between her eyes. Nurse Ramey struggled as the saw cut deeply into her face, bursting open each eye as it cut deeper and deeper into her skull. She gasped her final breath as the blade breached her skull and cut into her brain. All the noise within the morgue had gotten the attention of an officer posted just outside the door. Officer Green poked his head in through the door and called out. But he was quickly dealt with when Jacob kicked the door, knocking the man's head between the two double doors, cracking it open a bit and causing him to instantly drop to the floor, where Jacob proceeded to slam the door against the man's head a second time, pinning it between the door now in Jacob's grip and the other locked door behind Officer Green's head. This second slam broke the officer's nose, and then came a third, and a fourth, a fifth. The officer's face had become a bloody mess, and there wasn't much left of it. The man's entire head was nearly completely crushed between the steel doors, but with one last slam of the door, Jacob finished the job, crushing the man's head enough to sever it from the rest of his body and allowing the two doors to close completely once again. Jacob then looked back to the metal examining table to find his mask laying there, covered in Nurse Ramey's blood. Jacob grabbed the nearest thing he could find to again fasten the wooden mask to his burned and distorted face. Some small, yellow, medical tubing was then threaded through the holes of the mask where the rope had previously been. The stretchy, elastic-like rubber tubing was then tied off on either side before Jacob stretched the mask over his grotesque face. As he put the old wooden mask on, pieces of it began to crumble and break off. The years of wood rot and decay had made parts of the mask fragile, causing part of the bottom half of his mask to break away and reveal his rotting teeth behind it. Jacob snapped the medical tubing into place on his head, where it clung so tightly that it began to cut into the rotting flesh in a ring around it, cutting so deeply that a mixture of creamy yellow liquid and thick, dark red, almost black goo began to ooze out from around the tight-fitting rubber tubing. Back upstairs, Shiloh was eating some applesauce in her room with Ben, while Michael had taken a trip to the snack machine, leaving them alone in her room. "So," Ben began, Do you really think that guy's not dead? He asked Shiloh.
I'm sure of it. If you saw the things that I have, you would understand. Just trust me. Locust Lake has a habit of doing some pretty crazy things.
Shiloh answered. A scream then rang out from down the hall, outside Shiloh's room. Ben and Shiloh looked at each other in disbelief before Ben got up to limp to the door so he could see what was happening. Down the hall was a sight that completely shattered any hope for peace that Ben once had. There was Jacob Treagle, wreaking havoc upon several people in the hallway. Ben watched as the monster's large hands gripped onto a middle-aged man in a hospital gown before throwing him violently into a cinder block wall, breaking several of his bones and the wall in the process, followed by a male nurse with a name tag of Savini, whose head was crushed when Jacob pulled a nearby fire extinguisher off the wall and split his head open with it. Ben ran back into Shiloh's room as Jacob punched his fist clean into the stomach of a young man visiting his mother, pulling the man's intestines out with his fist when he withdrew, causing the man's guts to spill out of a softball-sized hole in his abdomen. "Come on, we've got to get out of here," Ben said to Shiloh.
It's him, isn't it?
Shiloh said. "Come on," Ben said as he helped Shiloh to her feet. She was in some pain, but the drug she had been given helped a lot. Together, the two of them limped at a brisk pace, out into the hallway, where people were still all scattering in panic. A chorus of screams and cries rang out through the hallway as Jacob tore through everyone in his way, leaving a trail of bodies, all bloodied and broken, in his wake. Shiloh and Ben ran down the hallway as fast as their wounded bodies would let them. They skipped past the nurse's office area and on past the elevators to get to the much more painful but safer option of the stairs. Nobody had time to sit and wait for the elevator while a madman was hot on their tail. Nurse Landis came out of hiding in the nurse's office in time for Jacob to rip through her like a hot knife through butter, his hands bursting through her torso before ripping outward, causing much of her body to split wide open before being ripped in half at the shoulder, resulting in her internal organs spilling out onto the tile floor. Shiloh and Ben burst through the door into the stairwell, and before descending the stairs, Shiloh reached out to pull the fire alarm to warn everyone else of the destructive force of nature that was Jacob Treagle. Together, the two of them limped and hobbled down the square-shaped stairwell. They were both on the third floor, and it took some time for them to make it down the stairs. But as they reached the last set of stairs, between the first and second floors, they heard a scream ring out above them, as a flailing body was thrown over the railing with such force that the man's head pinged off the railing of the second floor landing before plummeting the rest of the way to the marble floor below. Shiloh and Ben were hit with a new burst of adrenaline that allowed them to flee quickly down the final set of stairs to the first floor, as Jacob quickly pursued them. They still didn't have enough strength to get away, so they did the best thing they could. They ducked into the nearest unlocked office and locked the door behind them. Quickly, the two of them ducked behind the desk to hide. They sat there silently behind the desk. The sirens of the fire alarm drowned out any sounds from the hallway. It may have helped save the lives of many, but with the sirens and flashing white lights, there was now little chance of them being able to tell where Jacob was, or where he would attack from next. The two of them listened carefully for Jacob's heavy footsteps, but they could barely hear anything over the deafening siren. Slowly, the siren calmed, and only the flashing lights remained active, leaving the building silent once again. The two of them heard nothing for a long while, and began to think that they had given Jacob the slip. But just as they were beginning to feel somewhat safe, they heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. Ben peeked over the top of the desk to look through the clouded windows to see a shadow moving on the outside, and As the shadow stopped outside the locked door and began to jiggle the doorknob, Ben reached over to a nearby medical tray and found an assortment of dental equipment. After feeling around for whatever weapon he could find, he came back with a dental hook. Shit, Ben thought, looking down at the small toothpick in his hand and waiting for the monster to burst through the door at any moment. But nothing happened. Ben again peeked up over the desk to watch the shadow move across the glass windows that lined the room and then disappear behind the thick wall. Ben's eyes moved across the wall to see something that made his stomach sink. There was another door, a door that they hadn't locked. Ben ducked back behind the desk and looked at Shiloh as the door slowly creaked open and footsteps were heard entering the room. Ben held the dentist's toothpick tightly and prepared for a fight to a very quick death as he heard the footsteps approaching their position. Slowly, the footsteps got closer and closer before suddenly Ben jumped up from behind the desk, screaming a battle cry as he lunged at the attacker on the other side of the desk. The woman screamed in fear while covering her face to protect herself as Ben lunged at her. Ben stopped mid-attack and fell flat on his face on top of the desk that he attempted to jump over.
Please don't hurt me,
the woman said in fear. She was an older lady with gray hair and shoes to match. She wore a white doctor's coat with a name badge on the breast pocket that read, Dr. Cunningham.
Don't worry, we won't hurt you,
Shiloh reassured her.
Oh, thank God,
the woman said with a sigh of relief.
Did you see him out there?
Shiloh asked the doctor.
Yes, I watched him. I saw him kill my patient, along with several others. So much blood.
The poor doctor explained, obviously shaken up by the terrors that she had witnessed. It was then that the three of them heard a rattling, like muffled metal clinking softly against the floor. Another shadow could be seen now, walking outside the office windows. The handle of the door jiggled once again before the clanking continued as the figure outside the office moved toward the door. The handle turned and everyone hid, readying themselves for an attack. The door swung open and a shorter figure stepped out of the shadows and into the room, the fire alarm lights flickering against him. Ben poked his head up over the desk and sighed in relief to find that it was Michael. Michael, close the door and get over here, Ben whispered.
Ben? Is that you?
Michael said aloud. Shh! Everyone shushed him. Michael closed the door, this time locking it behind him, and hobbled over to the group of them on his crutches.
I'm glad you're all okay,
Michael said quietly.
We're glad you're safe too,
Shiloh replied. So how are we going to get out of here? Ben asked.
We aren't exactly in the best condition to be taking on another psycho killer,
Shiloh said. Oh, what happened to the badass girl that took on Casper? Ben said jokingly.
Oh, ha,
Shiloh said.
We should stay here and wait for help.
Dr. Cunningham interjected.
What?
Michael said.
We need to get as far away from that guy as fast as possible.
We should just sit here and wait for the police to arrive with firefighters. The fire alarm alerted them and they should be here any minute now. So we should just wait.
Dr. Cunningham explained. We should get out to the parking lot, Ben began. But we aren't in any shape to be running, he continued. While the three of them were discussing what to do, Shiloh sat in silence, kind of drifting off into thought. She thought about everything that she had been through, a series of brutal murders committed by a duo of masked beasts, a psychotic doctor, that foreboding figure of the woman in the lake. Then it hit her like a ton of bricks, the realization that everything at the lake was connected. She remembered the tale that was told to her by Michael about the woman in the water, the mother whose daughter was killed by 2 native boys, the mother whose pain, anger, and anguish that had tainted the lake and the surrounding lands. A young native girl, and the 2 boys that had killed her, the woman in the water, Casper and Jacob. It slowly became clear to her that it was that moment in time that had cursed the area. The mother's suffering over the murder of her daughter created the incarnation of evil by reincarnation of evil. Shiloh then remembered the clearing at the top of the mountain where she had hid, where Dr. Clark, Casper, and Jacob would not go. The old tree shaped like a menorah that had kept the evil away from her. An old tree that had probably been cut away by the loggers the previous day. A tree on top of an old mound.
It wasn't the tree,
Shiloh thought to herself. The tree had sat on top of a large mound of dirt. A burial mound. Shiloh knew in that instant that it had not been the tree that had saved her, but rather the burial mound beneath it. The burial mound where the native girl's bones now rested. She was killed all those years ago, and her light still remained trapped there, always in that ring of protection, and always keeping the dark forces that surrounded it at bay.
We need to go back to the lake,
Shiloh said quietly. The others stopped for a moment and looked over to her. What? Ben said.
We need to go back to the lake,
she repeated.
What?
Michael then asked.
Are you guys a broken record? We need to go back. We need to put a stop to this,
Shiloh continued.
First you fight off one supernatural murderer, and now you want to fight another? Do you have any idea at all how crazy that sounds?
Michael added.
Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but I think I know how to stop it,
Shiloh said.
Do you really know how crazy that sounds? Because I do not think that word means what you think it means. Because that is literally the most insane thing I have ever heard. And I used to live next door to a woman that believed you could tell someone's future by looking at their pee.
Michael informed her.
She also had a lot of cats.
He added.
The story you told us about the Lady of the Lake. She cursed the land because her daughter was murdered?
Shiloh explained.
Yeah, so?
Michael asked.
She killed the 2 guys who murdered her daughter. It was her that started all of this. 2 boys. 2 monsters. That is where everything began.
Shiloh continued. Ben said, a bit intrigued. So how do you think we can stop it? Ben asked.
By giving the mother what she wants.
Shiloh answered. Her daughter. Ben answered.
Exactly. We need to find the girl and return her to her mother.
Shiloh said. But it's been hundreds of years. We have no idea where she's buried. Ben added.
Yes, we do.
Shiloh said with a smile. Where? Ben asked.
The place where you found me.
Shiloh answered. The clearing with that weird-shaped tree on a little hill? Ben asked.
Yeah, Dr. Clark wouldn't set foot in there, and neither did Casper or the guy out there. I think that little hill is actually a burial mound, and I think it was her that stopped them.
Shiloh explained.
So, you want to go back to Locust Lake, walk up a mountain, dig up a specific set of my ancestors' bones from a burial mound, walk back down the mountain, and put the bones in the lake, all while avoiding death from who knows what at every turn?
Michael asked.
Yeah.
Shiloh said nonchalantly. Look at us, Shy. We aren't exactly in the best of shape. I can barely walk. Michael's on crutches, and you've had a shitload of stitches. I don't think we'd stand much of a chance of that. Ben interjected.
What in God's name are you 3 talking about?
Asked Dr. Cunningham, completely confused by the conversation. It was then that yet another set of footsteps could be heard out in the hallway, heavy-set footsteps. Then a large shadow walked by the window before stopping to jiggle the handle. Everyone inside froze up and remained silent. as the shadow outside then moved to the next door, where again the handle rattled, this time more violently than before. The group of them all watched as the shadow walked back toward the center of the large, clouded glass row of windows that lined the outside of the dentist's office. Then suddenly, the large mass lunged forward, shattering the glass and hurtling the small wall at the bottom, before landing onto a sea of bits and pieces of broken glass. Jacob Treagle lurched forward toward the group, all who screamed in panic as Jacob reached for Michael. Ben drove the small metal toothpick into Jacob's arm, burying it deep into his flesh. Jacob reacted to the attack and smacked Ben into a nearby wall, swatting him like a fly, before turning to Dr. Cunningham. The poor woman didn't even have a moment to react before Jacob's large hand was around her throat. Jacob then lifted the woman off the ground and slammed her forcefully onto the nearby dentist's chair. The woman screamed in fear, but she was quickly silenced when Jacob ripped the metal dental pick out of his arm and stabbed it down into the woman's mouth, where it gagged her before hooking into her uvula and ripping back outward, taking that dangling bit of muscle with it and ripping through, filling her mouth and throat with blood before being thrust back inward, breaking some of her teeth and slicing through her tongue along the way with each and every thrust, before Dr. Cunningham finally drowned in her own blood. The remaining three were both in shock and pretty much powerless to stop the sudden onslaught, but as Jacob was busy with the poor doctor, they decided it would be a good time to get the hell out of there. So the three of them limped their way out of the room as fast as possible and, again, made their way towards some kind of safety. As Jacob made quick work of Dr. Cunningham, the three of them moved as quickly as they could toward the lobby so that they could escape out into the parking lot. But when they got to the large open area of the lobby, they were stopped by two officers.
Whoa! Whoa! What's going on here?
The officer on the right said. Name tag read T. Hooper. "We have to get the hell out of here!" Ben yelled in panic.
Hey now, calm down.
The officer on the left said, his hand now on his gun holster. This officer's name tag read G. Romero.
There is a man killing everyone in there. We need to go.
Shiloh informed them.
Where is he now?
Asked Officer Hooper. Right behind us. We need to go, Ben yelled, still a bit panicked.
There are some others out in the parking lot being tended to. Go join them,
Officer Hooper added, letting the three of them pass. But not long after the three of them had escaped through the hospital doors, Jacob came around the corner and began walking towards the doors. The two officers drew their weapons, aiming them at the advancing monster.
Stop, police!
Yelled Officer Romero. Jacob didn't listen to him at all and continued advancing toward the hospital doors.
Stop! Get down on the ground!
Officer Hooper yelled to Jacob. Still no response. But when Officer Hooper attempted to stop Jacob with the swing of his baton, the baton was caught by a large hand, much to the shock of Officer Hooper. Jacob then forced the end of the baton instantly into and through the throat of Officer Hooper, stabbing the baton's dull end through his throat until it poked out the back of his neck, covered in gore. Officer Romero then began to fire, shooting Jacob several times in the legs and torso. With each shot, Jacob would react by reeling backward, but when the officer was out of bullets, Jacob was still left standing. Jacob then lunged onto the officer, ripping the gun out of his hands, snatching it by the barrel before slamming the handle full force down onto Officer Romero's head like a hammer. Repeatedly, Jacob hammered the gun into the officer's skull, eventually crushing a hole into it and turning the man's brain into a thick soup within a bowl that was his skull. Shiloh, Ben, and Michael quickly made their way out into the parking lot where only a little over a dozen patients were gathered around just a handful of doctors and nurses. A couple of police cars had also arrived, and the police were talking to the survivors and holding back the reporters and TV cameras. An officer then called to the three of them and sent them over to the others. Suddenly, Jacob burst out the door and began lurching toward the group of people in his path.
Freeze!
Screamed one officer.
Stop right there!
Yelled another. Jacob continued his advance, where he was met with hellfire of bullets from the handful of police that remained. As the bullets tore through Jacob, he began to tear through people, ripping off arms, legs, and heads as he passed through the crowd. The police reloaded and held their fire for a clear shot, but Jacob was unstoppable. He broke bones and dismantled people with ease as he passed through the crowd. While the chaos ensued, an ambulance squealed around the corner of the hospital and stopped suddenly ahead of Shiloh, Ben, and Michael. The door of the ambulance swung open to reveal a familiar face. Raybob was behind the wheel.
Hurry up and get in!
Raybob yelled. Without a word, Shiloh jumped into the passenger seat, while Ben and Michael climbed into the back, where a very scared medic sat, eyes wide with fear and breathing in short, panicked breaths. Raybob slammed on the gas, and the ambulance peeled away, squealing off down the road away from the chaos, rocking and clunking away quickly from the danger behind them.
Oh my god, thank you,
Shiloh said to Raybob.
Not a problem, little lady,
Raybob said.
What the hell was that?
The medic from the back spoke.
That was one of the killers of Locust Lake.
Michael said.
He probably killed half the people in the hospital.
He continued.
Oh, God.
The medic said, looking down at the floor of the ambulance.
I'm sure there were survivors,
Shiloh said, sensing the fear and sorrow in the medic's tone.
I'm Shiloh, and this is Ben and Michael, and you've already met Raybob. What's your name?
Shiloh added.
I'm Bobby Holland.
The medic answered.
So, where are we headed?
Raybob asked.
Locust Lake.
Shiloh answered.
Excuse me?
Raybob said, not sure if he had heard correctly.
We need to go back to Locust Lake,
she insisted.
Now why in Lord's name would you want to go and do that?
Raybob asked.
We have to stop this, and I know how to do it,
Shiloh answered. As the group of them traveled down the road, Shiloh explained the unbelievable story of how she intended to return the bones of the native girl to her mother's restless spirit that had tainted the lake and the land around it. Her story sounded incredible and completely unbelievable, but Raybob had witnessed firsthand the existence of monsters, so he didn't rule anything out. So, Raybob made the crazy decision to drive the dozen or so miles back to the lake. As the group of them reflected on the terror that they had seen and planned for the dangers ahead, the miles quickly passed. Then, suddenly a loud thud could be heard emanating from outside the back of the ambulance, followed by the ambulance's back door being ripped from its hinges and thrown onto the road below, where it skipped across the pavement and flipped off into the forest beside the road. Jacob had hitched a ride at the hospital and now clung to the back of the speeding ambulance. Slowly, he pulled himself into the ambulance where everyone panicked and screamed in terror. Michael began to beat Jacob with one of his metal crutches, quickly bending the weak aluminum over Jacob's rotting back. Jacob grabbed the crutch out of Michael's hand and flung it out the now wide open back end of the ambulance, before grabbing onto the medic and slamming the helpless girl into the wall of the ambulance with such a force that the ambulance fishtailed slightly. Jacob then flung poor Bobby out the back of the ambulance head first, where she rolled and somersaulted across the pavement, leaving a skipping trail of blood and bits of flesh down the road, as she skipped across the surface, before ultimately catapulting upward into the low-hanging trees at the side of the road, where she was left hanging in the branches like a morbid rag doll. Jacob then began his attack on the others, and Raybob in the chaos lost control of the ambulance and, in the emergency, spun off the road, flipped over, and began to roll toward a grouping of trees, throwing the lot of them out of the ambulance as it rolled through the bushes, flinging Jacob out of the back before coming to rest, upright against the trees. When Shiloh awoke, she was in even more pain than she had been earlier. Her medication had begun to wear off, and she had now not survived just 1 or 2, but 3 car crashes in just as many days. Shiloh looked around to see if everyone was all right before calling out to them.
Is everyone okay?
Shiloh asked, gripping her stomach a bit. Yeah, Ben grunted.
Ouch,
Michael muttered.
Sorry about that. Thank God we're all right.
Raybob said. The lot of them slowly climbed out of the wreckage and limped out back onto the road. Jacob was nowhere in sight, but they didn't want to stick around to try their luck. He came back from the dead after 1 crash, and they were sure another wouldn't stop him.
Look,
Shiloh said, pointing to an old sign with faded yellow letters, underlined with a lasso rope that had partially been chipped away with age. The sign read, "Just a gosh darn camp. 4 miles. Next right." The sign also had a red spray paint across it that read, "Casper Stoical," along with some other symbols like pentagrams and the numbers 666. The red, painted letters on the sign had begun to run before drying, causing the letters to appear like blood on the billboard.
just 4 more miles,
Shiloh said, before beginning her walk down the road toward her destination.
Just for the record, did I say this is literally the craziest thing anyone has ever done?
Michael said. Come on. Let's go. Ben sighed. The 4 of them began their long walk, hobbling and limping toward the evil land ahead. They were on a mission. They were the only ones that knew how to maybe put an end to the terror. They were the only ones that could break the curse on Locust Lake.
Well, I guess I shouldn't fret over this thing anyway. In the case of the Microsoft Xbox, it's just another curse waiting to be broken. But in any case, if you're unsatisfied and craving more terror and gore, make sure to stop in again next weekend for the exciting finale. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can see you at the lake again next Saturday.